I never thought I'd be the kind of man who snoops. For most of my 39 years, I believed in honesty, in privacy, in trust, especially in marriage. I was raised on that quiet code of respect, the kind where you don't check your partner's phone, don't second-guess where they've been, and don't assume the worst. Because if you have to assume, you've already lost something sacred. But that night, that cold, buzzing, silent night, I crossed the line. And I'm not sorry I did. Her name was Mara, my wife for 9 years. A quiet, graceful woman with a calm voice that could steady storms. I used to tell my friends that her presence was like gravity, gentle, constant, invisible, but powerful enough to hold me together. And maybe that was true once. But gravity changes when you find out the world you orbit isn't what you thought. I came home late from work that evening, around 10:45. The house smelled of burnt coffee and her perfume, a faint citrus with something darker underneath. There was an open laptop on the counter, a soft hum from the kitchen light, and no sound from upstairs. At first, I thought she was asleep. But then I saw the screen, an email half-written, cursor blinking. The subject line read, "He suspects." It was like a gunshot without sound. I didn't move for a full minute. My heart didn't just pound, it shifted. It was as if something old inside me cracked, and all the warmth drained out. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. My hands were shaking, my throat dry, my mind numb. The email was written to someone named Alec. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense. No, I miss you, no, I love you. It was practical, cold, coded almost. She wrote, "He's been checking the statements. You need to move the rest before Friday. Don't use the same route again. If he calls, stall him." And then, the part that gutted me, if he finds the key, it's over. The key. What key? I scrolled through the sent folder. There were more messages, not to Alec, but to someone named C. Frost, each one cleaner, more formal, like business correspondence. Transfers, codes, attachments labeled consulting logs, and client data. It didn't read like an affair, at least not at first. It read like coordination. But something deeper was there, a pattern. And that name Frost that triggered something faint, like a half-memory. Then I saw the attachment, a photo. Not one of me, not of her. A man, middle-aged, in a suit, sitting in what looked like a hotel bar. Timestamped from 2 nights ago. That was when I realized it wasn't just cheating. It was something bigger, something that reeked of risk, of crime, of betrayal in layers. I closed the laptop and sat down at the table. The clock ticked behind me, a small, sharp metronome in the quiet. My mind was already unraveling her patterns. The new job she'd taken 6 months ago, the late conferences. The money that seemed to vanish from our accounts only to reappear weeks later in smaller amounts. I had chalked it up to her taking control of our finances. I trusted her with everything. The irony didn't escape me. I'm a forensic analyst, the kind of man who traces digital footprints, restores deleted files, follows the invisible threads people leave behind. I'd built a career finding truth in secrets. And I'd never thought to use that skill on the one person closest to me. But that night, I opened my own investigation. I cloned her drive. I mirrored her messages, mapped her contacts, extracted metadata from every file. Within hours, my quiet suburban kitchen had become a crime scene in all but name. What I found, it wasn't just infidelity. It was an operation. The next morning, I confronted her, not directly, but subtly. I asked about her trip next week, about her conference in Seattle. Her face flickered. Not much, but enough. A small twitch at the corner of her mouth, the faintest delay before her answer. I'd seen it before, not from her, but from suspects. Liars who believe their lies are art. That's when I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I had everything. By that weekend, I had access to her encrypted drives and burner emails. One domain kept showing up repeatedly, tsera-group.net. It was registered under a private proxy in Zurich, but I recognized the encryption signature, AS layered with a custom wrapper I'd seen before. in my professional life. It belonged to a contractor called Sablecore, a data recovery firm that specialized in offshore incident response, translation, digital cleanup for corporations who had something to hide. And apparently, Mara had worked for them. The deeper I went, the more dangerous it looked. There were transaction logs, high-value transfers routed through shells, communications with unknown entities using alphanumeric handles. It was espionage adjacent, or corporate fraud at least, and every file pointed back to Alec Frost, the man from the photo. I watched that picture again and again. His smirk, the way his tie set loose, like he didn't care who saw him. And I realized she hadn't fallen in love with him. She'd been recruited. Maybe they'd offered her money, maybe leverage, maybe something darker. But whatever it was, she'd taken it. And she'd taken me with it, my name, my credentials, my work systems. She'd used me to build her cover. I didn't sleep that night. I planned. I made backups of every file and hid them in cloud fragments under different aliases. I started logging her movements with discrete RFID tags, not because I didn't know where she was, but because I wanted to know why. I wanted to see how far she'd gone. And when she kissed me goodbye the next morning, her eyes still soft and warm, I smiled back. I had to, because I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her hunter. When I began following her, it wasn't rage that drove me, it was precision. Anger clouds your sight, precision sharpens it, and I needed to see clearly. For 2 weeks, I played the role of the quiet, forgiving husband, the kind who smiles at breakfast, who asks how work's going, who lets the little things slide. She thought I'd softened. She didn't know I was documenting every movement she made, every trip, every call, every login. That's the thing about deceit. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like smoke. It fills every room of your mind until you can't tell what's clean air anymore. I set up a hidden tracker in her car, nothing fancy. A modified Bluetooth beacon tucked behind the dashboard. Her usual route to work was 20 minutes downtown, to the consulting firm she claimed to represent. But on the third Thursday, the beacon stopped at a location that wasn't on any business directory, a nondescript warehouse on the east side of the city. The address, 1047 Weaver Street. It was listed as a logistics firm. But I knew better. The security cameras around it weren't city issue. They were thermal, privately networked. That's what corporations use when they want to stay invisible. I didn't follow her inside that first day. I waited, watched, logged timestamps. By the time she returned home that evening, I already had 4 hours of surveillance footage, 2 intercepted texts, and one clear realization. She wasn't just meeting Alec Frost. She was working for him. The messages I decrypted were brief, utilitarian, coded. Arrived. Transfer complete. Use the ledger next pass. Close loop by Friday. The word ledger again. I'd seen it before in her emails. It wasn't an account book. It was something else. Something that connected Frost, Sablecore, and my wife. That night, while she showered, I accessed her phone's cache through the network bridge I'd planted on her laptop. Photos, encrypted notes, one video thumbnail labeled Art-1. I almost didn't open it. Almost. It showed her and Frost in a car, parked somewhere I didn't recognize. They weren't touching. She was talking fast, nervous. He leaned toward her, calm, detached, like a man giving orders, not affection. At one point she said, "He'll find out. He's not stupid." Frost smiled. "Then we'll use him." That's when I paused the video. I leaned closer to the screen, my reflection warped in the pixels. Use him. That was me. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was violation. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being handled. My name, my system access, my trust turned into weapons I hadn't known I'd given her. That's when I started building phase 1 of my plan. I used an old alias, Reed Marks, and rented a small workspace under a fake consultancy downtown. From there, I built my control board, mirrored drives, encrypted messaging bots, physical logs, and a growing network of connections that all pointed back to Sablecore. Every night, after she fell asleep, I combed deeper into the data. I found that the ledger wasn't a financial record, it was a digital registry. Names, companies, transfer dates, all encoded with time-stamped hashes. My name appeared once, buried in the metadata, tied to an internal project ID, RDN_45 to .RDN, Ardent. She'd told me months ago she was on Project Ardent. She'd laughed when I'd asked about it, said it was boring paperwork. Turns out, the name wasn't a coincidence. Ardent was a cover for something larger, a black-budget laundering operation that used corporate forensics to wash data leaks. And Frost was at the center of it. That realization didn't break me. It sharpened me, because now I had something to aim at. The first time I tailed her in person, I was careful, not because I feared being caught, but because I wanted her to believe in her illusion a little longer. She left home at 7:15, same as always. Coffee in a thermos, black blazer, earbuds in. I followed her from 3 cars back, through the downtown stretch, into the industrial district. At 7:46, she turned onto Weaver Street again, parked by the same warehouse. This time, I got out. I parked 2 blocks away, cut through an alley, and positioned myself behind a half-collapsed fence across from the loading dock. 2 guards stood outside, not uniformed, not casual, the type that don't look around much because they already know who belongs and who doesn't. For 37 minutes, nothing happened. Then a van arrived, no plates, tinted windows. She came out with Frost. He was taller than I'd thought, his movements calm, practiced. They exchanged a brief handshake with a man from the van and then disappeared inside. I took photos, time-stamped everything. But something else caught my eye, a faint reflection from the top floor. Someone else was watching them too. A silhouette behind glass, motionless. That image stayed with me, because it meant this operation had layers even she didn't see. When she returned home that night, she kissed me like nothing had changed. I pretended not to notice the faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine. She cooked dinner, laughed about a coworker's mistake, asked if I could fix her printer over the weekend. And I, the loyal husband, nodded, smiled, asked how her conference prep was going. But as she spoke, I watched her eyes. Not the way she looked at me, but the way she didn't. That distant, measured look you see in someone who's already rewritten the story in their head. Later that night, when she fell asleep, I whispered to the dark, "You're not the only one keeping records." By week 3, I had a dossier, 56 pages, cross-referenced, encrypted twice, names, accounts, dates, and a new name, Vance, tied to the warehouse's registration. A front manager for Sablecore. I found Vance's photo through a security leak, former military contractor, specialist in field logistics and personnel disposal. The kind of man who makes people disappear without headlines. My wife was in business with him. She wasn't in danger. She was the danger. That was the night I stopped thinking about confronting her and started thinking about how to destroy her. By Sunday, I'd drawn up what I called Phase 2, collapse. The plan wasn't about violence, not yet. It was about leverage, exposure, making every thread she'd pulled tighten around her until she couldn't move. I was going to make her world fall apart piece by piece. Her friends would turn, her partners would vanish, her accounts would lock, and when she had no one left to run to, then I'd show her what betrayal really looks like. But before I could begin, something changed. On Monday morning, she didn't leave at 7:15. She left at 6:42 alone, no coffee, no briefcase. I checked the tracker. She wasn't heading to Weaver Street. She was heading toward me. She drove to my office, parked, waited. I watched from my secondary feed as she entered the lobby. Calm, composed, she asked for me by name. That was when the message hit my phone, an unknown number. No sender, she knows. My blood went cold. She wasn't the one being followed anymore. I was. When I saw her step into the lobby of my building, something inside me fractured. Not the part that loved her. That part had already been ground down to dust weeks ago. But the part that believed I was in control. She shouldn't have known. Not about the trackers, not about the surveillance, not about any of it. Yet there she was, her hair tied back like she always did when she meant business. Her eyes scanning the reception area with a cold patience that used to make me feel safe. I stayed upstairs, watching through the security feed. She asked the receptionist for me. Calm, professional, no sign of nerves. When the receptionist told her I wasn't in yet, she smiled. That same smile she used to give waiters when she wanted something for free and said she'd wait. She sat in the lobby for almost an hour. Didn't check her phone once. Just stared at the glass doors, as if she knew I was behind them. At 9:13 she left. No message, no call, just gone. When I finally walked down to the lobby, there was a folded napkin on the receptionist's desk with my name on it. Inside, a single line written in her handwriting. Stop digging, Marcus. You don't know who you're dealing with. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. I drove straight home. My heart wasn't racing. It was methodical, mechanical. Every movement I made was deliberate, like I was running on autopilot. The house looked normal from the outside, but as soon as I walked in, I felt it, that subtle displacement. Like someone had been there, touching things they shouldn't. Her perfume lingered in the air, vanilla and something sharp. I checked my office first. The safe was untouched, the drives still locked. But on my desk, right next to my keyboard, there was a new coffee mug, white ceramic, plain, except for a single fingerprint smudge on the handle. Hers. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. I've been here, I know, and yet she hadn't taken anything, no files, no notes. She'd only left evidence of her presence, like a ghost letting you know you're being haunted. That's when I realized something critical. She wasn't just trying to scare me. She was sending me a signal, a warning disguised as a threat. But why warn me if I was just a target? That night, I went back to my system and pulled every bit of data related to her connection with Frost and Sable Core. There was something I'd missed, something buried too deep for me to see before. At 2:47 a.m. I found it. Hidden in one of her cloud sync folders was a set of encrypted documents labeled RAC. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a spiderweb, thousands of nodes, corporate aliases, shell accounts, and falsified identity chains. And right in the center of that digital web, her name, but not her name, Clara Voss. That was her real identity. Not the one she'd used for 10 years with me, not the one on our marriage license. Everything I thought I knew about her fake. She hadn't just betrayed me romantically or emotionally. She'd built a life around me as a cover. The last 10 years of my marriage had been in operation, and I was the cover story. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed to trace Clara Voss. There were almost no records online. One government reference from 2008, classified contractor, overseas placement, inactive. One legal record from 2011, expunged. And one current alias tied to Frost Industries. That meant she'd been in this long before we met, before Marcus Holt ever existed in her world. The more I dug, the more I understood. She wasn't just cheating, she was infiltrating. I don't know how long I stared at her photo on my monitor that morning. She looked like the woman I'd shared a bed with, same eyes, same soft smile. But now every pixel of her face looked artificial, manufactured. That's when the front door opened. She wasn't supposed to be home. It was 11:23 a.m. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate, not panicked, not surprised. Marcus, she called out. Her voice calm. Are you here? I didn't answer. I muted the keyboard, shut down the monitor, and slipped into the hallway. She stopped in the living room, right near the window. The sunlight caught her hair, and for a second, she looked like she used to. The woman who made me coffee in the mornings, who kissed me on my birthday. Marcus, she said again, this time quieter. You shouldn't have done that. I stepped into view, done what she turned, no fear. Just that cold, detached professionalism I'd seen in the Frost video. You were never supposed to get involved, she said. You were supposed to be the one thing that stayed clean. I almost laughed. Clean, you used me. She nodded, and you used me. The difference is, I was trained for it. Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't being dramatic. This wasn't a lover's quarrel anymore. It was a professional containment scenario. Who are you? I asked. She exhaled, looked down at the floor, then met my eyes again. The person trying to keep you alive. Before I could respond, she pulled a small flash drive from her pocket and tossed it onto the table between us. You have 3 days before Frost wipes every trace of you, your files, your accounts, your job. They're already in motion. If you want to survive this, you'll listen to me and trust you. I asked bitterly. She smiled faintly. No, just stay one step ahead. Then she walked out. No explanation, no apology. Just that single phrase hanging in the air, stay one step ahead. That night, I plugged the flash drive into an isolated laptop. The drive contained one file, a video timestamp from 2 days ago. It showed a boardroom, Frost at the head of the table. 2 men in suits, 1 woman with a laptop. They were discussing the ledger. My name came up twice. He's tracing too much data. If he publishes any of this, it could breach our encryption grid. Then Frost leaned forward, his voice calm but lethal. Then remove him, quietly, and make it look domestic. That's when I saw her, my wife, sitting silently in the corner. She didn't look at him, didn't speak, but she nodded once. That single nod burned itself into my brain. I shut the laptop. My hands were trembling, not from fear, from clarity. Because now I finally understood what her warning meant. Frost wasn't going to just erase me digitally. He was going to make me disappear. And if she was trying to save me, it was only because she needed me alive for something worse. So I started preparing, not to hide, not to run, but to fight. Because if I was going to go down, I wasn't going quietly. Not after everything she'd taken, not after the lies, the manipulation, the rewriting of my life into a cover story. She thought she'd trained me to be blind, but she'd forgotten something vital. I was her husband. I'd studied her every day for 10 years, and I knew exactly how she thought. When someone offers you a map to their own ruin, you don't ask for directions. You study the ink. That's what the flash drive had been. Ink on a map. It showed a path, not just to my death, but to the crown of the small empire Frost wore like a cheap ring. If I was going to survive, I would need to take the ring, not the man. I slept badly for 3 nights. Sleep would have meant surrender. Instead, I cataloged. I made lists. I burned every file I could spare onto dead drops, scattered mirroring copies across countries, and kept a core archive in a place even Frost's reach would only find when he was looking for what he owed. Edie lost. Paranoia became a tool. Planning became worship. Mara, my wife, called twice in that week. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Her voice message was a mix of urgency and old tenderness. Marcus, she said once, you have to trust me. She left numbers and a street address I knew, and then the sound of a door closing. I let the messages sit like rotten fruit in my inbox. I wanted not to answer. That was cowardice and tactic in the same breath. I was learning how to be both. By the end of the week I had an edge, a mistake Frost had made. Men like him think themselves invisible because they use layers, proxies, shell firms, offshore trusts. They sign manifests in fonts that blur into legalese. They sleep in hotels and take flights under other names. Eventually, they get sloppy. Frost had used an email he thought disposable to coordinate a cleanup contractor named Vantage Solutions. A stray header and a forwarded note had included a local conference registration for Vantage's lead, a name, a public room number, a date. A room number is a small thing. It is also a door. The conference was tomorrow. Frost would be there, maybe to speak, maybe to buy favors, maybe to watch people in the pretense of philanthropy. Either way, he would be visible in flesh and air. That was all the leverage I needed. I printed a ticket under Reed Marks and booked a seat near the back. I wrote a short, cold email to Lena. If I vanish, go live with the files. Don't wait, she replied with a wry smiley and a one-word confirmation. Got it? Andre transferred the last mirrored drives to a courier who would hand them to a Swiss attorney if things went sideways. We had a net. The conference hall smelled of recycled ambition, coffee brewed to sustain applause, leather briefcases, the soft clack of badge holders against velvet lanyards. Frost was exactly as he'd been in the photograph. Loose tie, the expression of a man who rarely is surprised. He spoke about the ethics of data stewardship to a room full of people who paid handsomely to avoid it. Hypocrisy is a good mask for men of his stripe. I stayed in the back, quiet. I listened for names he dropped, the cadence of his jokes, the flicker in his eye when he mentioned operational partners. People like Frost surround themselves with things that confirm their narrative. I was the ant in the crumb pile he ignored. After his talk, he drifted toward the buffet, a practiced predator in linen trousers. I followed at a distance, the way one reads the margins of a book to find the author's margin notes. At the hors d'oeuvres table he met with a man who looked like he'd been set for the role, broad shoulders, cheap watch, a stare that never softened. The man was Vantage's lead. He went by the name Carl Reeves. They spoke for a long time about cleaning and continuity. Their language was administrative, neutralize, archive, remove. I recorded it on a tiny device tucked into the collar of my jacket. The air tasted metallic. The more I listened, the more the words were not words of business but stamps of sentencing. When Frost excused himself, he walked past me without recognition. That was when I acted. I had 3 things I needed to do in the next hour. First, plant a breadcrumb trail that made their logistics look sloppy enough to follow. Second, get close enough to Frost to make him twitch. Third, secure the live feed to Lena without making the path back to me obvious. The first was a small genius in pettiness. I slipped into a hallway and dropped, deliberately, carefully, a wallet. Inside were a couple of cards with the name Reed Marks and a business card for a dummy address in the city. It was amateurish enough to be noticed, clever enough to be traced. Men like Frost believe in tidy narratives. Someone with a wallet is a someone they can use. They would pick it up, run a check, and confirm it fit their expectation. An annoying freelance forensics meddler. The wallet was bait and a confirmation that the breadcrumb worked. The second was a less tidy art. I needed Frost to slip a hint, a micro-expression, a gesture that marked the man's center. I found the slip 10 minutes later when he reached into his jacket for a note, and the wallet tumbled out of his coat pocket. The same one I'd dropped earlier but planted in his presence by a coy intercept. He looked around, and when he saw the wallet held by a nervous intern, the micro-expression flickered, a flash of recognition, and the faintest twinge of fear. He picked up the wallet as if retrieving a personal justification. His finger brushed the dummy business card. He had a momentary knot in his brow, then a practiced laugh. He was precise in his public shame, but privately rattled. The seed had been set. Men like Frost don't like rattles. The third was the dangerous part. I needed to get inside his personal orbit with a reason small enough to pass security but large enough to give me access. I had a name, Harper Leeds, a consultant Frost used occasionally for compliance reviews. I'd spoofed a LinkedIn profile for Harper weeks ago, built a trace, left a digital breadcrumb that suggested an intersection of interests, data ethics, a shared past with a think tank, a fabricated mutual acquaintance who could vouch for me. The internet believes what it wants to believe. Harper Leeds was persuasive enough to convince the conference admin and to secure a seat at a small, invite-only round table after the speeches. I walked into that round table and sat across from Frost. He scanned me briefly, eyes skittering. I introduced myself as Harper, and asked the kind of innocuous questions that pry into routines. He answered without caution initially, then more guardedly. His center collapsed when someone asked about archival protocols for off-grid data. "We prefer closed cycles," he said. "Permanent removal is inefficient and immoral to discuss in the open." He smacked at the phrase like a man trying to remove a splinter. I let the words hang. The mic in my tie was off. Lena was ready to cut a live feed on a 3-second delay. I needed Frost's voice on the record, not mine rattling around in a sticky hole. So I asked a question that required Frost to speak plainly. "What do you classify as neutralized?" His answer was slow, mechanical. Neutralized when an asset is rendered incapable of further action. It's a technical classification, not a moral one. We document and ensure our clients' liabilities are managed. The room shifted like a crowd sensing thunder. There was a murmur. I let them murmur. Frost's posture hardened. He had been caught teaching children arithmetic in a room full of adults. The words were defensible, but the intent was not. When the round table broke, I left a trail of messages sent from Harper Leeds to a fake assistant about a follow-up on neutralizations. The line was forwarded, within minutes, to Frost's private assistant because that's how networks work. Gossip travels faster than truth. Within the hour, Frost received a note suggesting a private debrief in the conference's smaller boardroom. He accepted, the smug certainty of men who live in sanctuaries. He went into the room, expecting a comfortable autopilot. He did not expect the door to be locked from the outside and a camera to be on. Lena went live. Her voice was calm on the feed. "We have a recording request from an anonymous whistleblower," she said. "If Mr. Alec Frost would like to speak, the world is ready to listen." The camera in the room made Frost's movements small. He laughed at first, a brittle sound, then tried to regain control. He called for security. The door remained closed. In less than 10 minutes his voice was on record, answering questions about eradication protocols, partner firms, and the ledger. He tried 100 safe answers, PR polish, legal disclaimers, lies of omission. When they showed him the small clip from the drive where he'd said "remove him," that phrase, his face drained. He tried to turn the narrative. He tried to say his words had been taken out of context. But context is what men like him buy. When context fails, words remain. When security came to the boardroom, they found a man who was livid and frightened. He demanded the feed be cut, his assistants called lawyers, and his mobile phones lit up with counselors and PR aides. The hotel staff were embarrassed and then obliging. The conference wanted no scandal. Scandals move money. Money moves men. By nightfall there were calls outside the hall, Frost's people trying to buy silence, various patrons calling to demand the cameras be turned off, and the conference organizer trying to salvage donor relationships. But the seed had grown small branches. The footage was neared. The drives were out. Vantage Solutions, the contractor, tried to claim a cyber attack. They had no solid alibi beyond practiced denials. In the court of public opinion, denials get less traction than recorded words. I didn't celebrate then. The world does not bend neatly, but there was a tremor in the machine. Frost was off balance. Men who thought themselves invulnerable expanded to cover that imbalance with more machinery and, as machine-made men do, they began to make mistakes. They moved quickly. Frost summoned his lieutenants and began a purge of loose ends. Names on ledgers were blurred. Drives were wiped. Contractors were paid for consultations. But men who have lived by silence know that sometimes the best way to keep a secret is to make more of them. The more layers you add, the fewer places you can slip a blade without touching someone's hand. That night, back at my rented flat under different name, I checked the feeds. Lena had the footage. Andre reported on server shifts. Ties were being cut. Frost's email domain had a flurry of password resets. People who had been comfortable suddenly tasted fear. The ledger's outer shell had been cracked, but there was retaliation. The police pulled me in the next morning under pretext a noise complaint, an anonymous tip, and questioned me for 3 hours. It was theater, thinly veiled. Frost could call favors. Men like him have friends in precincts and PR firms and businesses. They can make inconvenience look like law. I left the station shaken but wiser. The public fight was a blade we could use, but it also opened us to a more private war. That was what Frost wanted now, to take us out in ways the cameras couldn't watch. They tried twice more in short order. A car followed me at night and then cut off when I recognized the plate, a company tied to a trust account in the ledger. Someone broke into Andre's storage locker and took a bag with backup drives, not all of them, a selection. The selection was a message. We can touch you. We adapted. We hardened. We moved crucial copies to physical locations our adversaries could not see. A colleague in Stockholm, a friend in Geneva, a drive in a safety deposit box under an assumed name. The mantra became redundancy. The lodestone became truth. Frost, for all his power, never fully saw me. He saw a ghost. He saw Harper Leeds, a polite consultant. He saw Reed Marks who dropped wallets and asked questions. He did not see a husband learning to wield the ledger he'd been used as. And neither did he see what came next. In the days after the conference, a quiet domino fell. Vantage Solutions announced a review of its contracts. Arkwright Logistics had an audit. Barton Security, the Courier partners, had a sudden change in management. Men who had been corners of the ledger were shown the exits. But the exits were visible and public. The ledger's backbone was being exposed. The machine was bleeding. It didn't end it. Nothing ends corruption completely. Frost attempted to strike back in personal ways, a threat to my mother in a small town that made me call the police, a hacked voicemail left on Laura's sister's phone implying family peril. Cold, professional, without remorse. Men like Frost cannot imagine tenderness. They understand only advantage and consequence. I understood that too, so I pushed harder, but not with brute force. I used the small tools people underestimate. Legal procedures, international press, the kind of meticulous documentation that makes deniability harder. I leveraged the thing Frost had always avoided, the public record. 3 weeks after I'd walked into the conference hall, a governmental oversight body announced a probe. It was slow and bureaucratic and imperfect, but it had teeth. Frost's initial defenses, lawyers, donations, influence, found themselves in the spotlight. People started to ask questions at the boardroom level. Board members shifted uneasily. Clients asked for audits. Donors asked for transparency. We had not won. We had not toppled kings. But we had forced a machine designed to function in the dark to stand in the light. In that light, men like Frost scuttle. They cannot move the way they once did. Clara called me the day the probe was announced. Her voice was a whisper this time. "You've made them nervous," she said. It was not gratitude. It was a cold observation. "Be careful. They will try to make you collateral. Then they'll gain nothing," I said. She didn't argue. There was no warmth, but there was something else in her voice, respect, or maybe recognition. I didn't know which. It didn't matter. We had the ledger's edges exposed now. We had a crack. We had momentum. And for the first time in months, as I sat alone and watched the city lights smear into one another, I let myself believe that the man who had used me for years might finally have to answer for the lives he had made disappear. But I also knew there was always a price. The ring at Frost's finger glittered. I intended to take it slowly and thoroughly, until the hand that wore it was empty. They tell you vengeance is a tidal thing. It comes in slow, and then it hits you all at once. The last weeks had been a long swell, leaks, probes, small victories that taste like salt and rust. The final hour came suddenly, and then it stretched until dawn. When the oversight body opened its probe, it was like turning a key in a lock. Small men who thought themselves secure suddenly discovered their names in public documents. Board members who had accepted gifts with a smile found their faces in feeds. Clients who preferred contracts that spoke in euphemisms started asking for plain language and audits. Frost's defenses, lawyers, and donations, and smooth PR couldn't close every door at once. They moved to triage and in doing so, left gaps. I'd been careful. I'd kept copies of everything. The ardent files from the flash drive, the cash we lifted from the warehouse, the recording from Frost's conference debrief, Haines' confession in the alley, the ledger fragments that tied trust accounts to shell payments, and to specific shipments. We distributed copies across secured channels, an encrypted set with a reputable attorney in Geneva, mirrored archives with journalists who had a backbone, and physical drives and safety deposit boxes tied to names we could trust. The redundancy was cruel but necessary. If they burned one copy, another would survive. If they silenced one outlet, another would speak louder. On the day Frost's indictment was unsealed, the city felt like it had been waiting for a bedrock to crumble. I watched news anchors try to look surprised but competent, watched op-eds form like a net thrown over a flailing beast. Frost sat stone-faced in the footage, a man stunned because he'd miscalculated how many people had something to lose by his silence. They arrested him quietly, no dramatic raid, no televised hoist. Men who make disappearances leave fingerprints on paper in the hands of prosecutors with the time and the courage to read it as a kind of justice. The indictment cited conspiracy to commit illicit transport and concealment of persons and property fraud and obstruction of justice. The language was blunt enough to matter and precise enough to stick. You'd think that would be enough, that it would be the last page. It wasn't. The ledger had teeth. It took men's lives by indexing and anonymizing. It had also built networks of people who preferred quiet compensation to moral reckoning. Some of them fought back. Not all fights are public. Some are executed in whispers and in the slow erosion of those who bear witness. They came for Andre first. It wasn't the kind of hit movie show. No black SUVs with men in masks. It was subtler, professional. The courier who used to run Andre's extra routes was found drunk on a highway and couldn't remember 4 hours of the night. His bank accounts drained. His phone wiped. He quit answering texts. Then his brother called and said he'd disappeared for a while, needed time. We never discovered the whole truth because sometimes the ledger uses pressure that isn't neat enough to be pinned to a body. Few people go quiet. You fail to find the link in time. Andre decided to go dark after that. He packed what he needed and left a note. If you need me, use the dead drop at the pier we used last year. He meant it. He understood how these things rearrange lives. He had no appetite for martyrdom. He still sent me an encrypted message later. Once, you were right about redundancy. That was all. Lena took the public heat like a champion. Journalists who attach themselves to big stories become lightning rods, and she was bright enough to draw it without burning. She weathered smear campaigns, anonymous calls accusing her of fabricating evidence, threats to her editor, and a late-night attempt to hack her feeds. She held firm. Her writing cut and sewed until the public had no comfortable place to stand. Clara Mara, she moved like someone who had been living in a cold house for years and then stepped into a kiln. She testified. She did not lie. She told the jury the things that would hurt her more than anyone else. She spoke of recruitment, of grooming, of a promise that protection for one could be the cost for many. She told them how she'd thought she could control what she'd been asked to do, how she'd believed her compromises had limits. The court watched as the ledger's architecture unfolded from paper to people. It was ugly and necessary. People asked me after, sometimes in bars or in poorly lit kitchens, if it had been worth it, if the grief had balanced out with the justice. Those are questions only time can answer, because justice is a landscape built over yours. In the moment, you only know what you did and whether, with what you had, you could stand in front of it. I stood across from Frost in the courtroom on the day the prosecution played the conference clip of him saying, "Then remove him." He had a lawyer who muttered, a man who bought words like walls. Frost's eyes flicked to me halfway through the footage. He did not shout. He did not lunge. He looked smaller than his profile had ever suggested. That's what exposure does. It shrinks those who bred in the dark. But the ledger had arms we hadn't predicted. There were reprisals after the indictment. Laterally targeted. A witness's car found idling with an engine on. A courier's address bricked with bricks, and a note that said, "We can be patient. Threats are bladed things, you can dodge them. But sometimes, they nick the people you love." A server in our legal chain got fried in a sudden power surge. A notarized affidavit went missing for a heartbeat and resurfaced in a different jurisdiction. They were not gods. They were men with reach, and reach can complicate proof. The prosecution's success depended on stubbornness and on redundancy. For every drive that went dark, another copy hummed in a safe in Geneva. For every witness that buckled, another stood up and said what they saw. For every sneer, the truth had an answer. It was not a triumphant moment. It was a messy, grievous victory. At sentencing, the judge read slowly. Frost received years, substantial time. Rennick and other contractors were indicted in staggered waves as provinces and nations coordinated. Mallett's trustees were called to accounts. Their charities were audited and restructured. The web contracted. Men who had made careers in anonymity had to adapt to a world that could, for once, find them. And then, most unexpectedly, something smaller but more personal. Clara walked out into the courthouse corridor after a long day, tired but upright, and stopped in front of me. She looked like someone who had been through a storm and come from the other side without all her belongings. We didn't hug. There was nothing theatrical, nothing gushy. We spoke in half phrases. "I never wanted you to know like this," she said. Her voice was soft with something like sorrow or perhaps gratitude. "I thought I could control it. I thought I could protect us." "You used protection to buy complicity," I said. The words landed like small stones. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't a ledger entry," I said. "But it's a start." We walked away separate. There is no clean reconciliation where ledger entries are burned and lives are counted. There are, at best, arrangements and long, slow repairs. Sometimes that's enough. Months later, life reoriented. The public outrage ebbed into new stories. Institutions wrote new policies and hired compliance officers who sounded hopeful. Regulators tightened loopholes. Men who once considered themselves untouchable retired earlier than they planned. But the ledger's shadow remained, a reminder that systems are seductive and repair is incremental. I taught a course in ethics for private security. I felt ridiculous at first, standing in front of students who'd never seen the ledger, who took for granted that words like integrity meant something. I told them stories without names. I told them about redundancy and moral audit trails. I taught them the difference between complicity and coercion with a firmness that surprised me. It felt like penance, and sometimes penance is a form of practical service. Andre came back some months later. He'd been in a small town in Idaho, laying low. He'd changed his number, grown a beard, and laughed at a joke I told him in a diner like nothing had happened. But he was careful, and we both knew why. We traded quiet absolutions and the exchange of favors with men who suddenly needed someone who knew how systems could fail. Lena won an award. She deserved it. She accepted with a steadier hand than I would have had. The journalism did more than indict men. It altered a conversation. People started asking uncomfortable questions. People who could be uncomfortable started acting. What did I lose? Many things. A marriage, finally. Not the person, the institution of us, which had been built on different foundations than I'd believed. Trust is a fragile ledger. My reputation in the industry was bloodied too. Potential clients wondered at my methods. Security often prefers invisible workers to visible crusaders. But I gained something else. Knowledge that some systems can be nudged into the light, and a version of myself that would not let men vanish people under. The soft rubric of asset management. People ask if I had regrets. Sure, I regret the small human things that can't be legislated away. The dinner candles that no longer burn between us. The birthday cards that sit in a drawer like evidence. The quiet afternoons without the shape of someone I loved. I regret the cost paid by others who were tangled in the ledger's wiring. But I have no regret about the ledger itself, the decision to pull it into the open. Justice is a dirty room. Cleaning it costs scorched rags. Sometimes at night I walk the pier where we set the dead drop months earlier. The water slaps the pilings politely. The city lights wash like watercolor. I think about the men who made themselves invisible, and about the small things that made them visible. A dropped wallet, a camera in a boardroom, a journalist who refused to flinch. I think about Clara and the complicated truth of human choices. I think about the ledger and how fragile the paperwork is when enough people refuse to look away. If this story has an ending, it is not tidy. Systems regenerate, men adapt, but the ledger lost something it could not easily regain. The confidence of invisibility. That is a beginning, not an end. For now the machine's louder edges are carved in public records and court files. The quieter parts still stick in places you can't scrub with code. I keep backups. Old instincts die hard. I teach young people what I wish someone had taught me. How to build systems that resist easy corruption. How to insist on chain of custody. And how to be suspicious of clean words in dirty rooms. It is modest work, but it feels worthwhile. On certain mornings, when the city is quiet and the light is thin, I sit at diner with a coffee that's gone cold and read the paper. I look at faces without needing to catalog them. It's a small mercy. It's a reminder that vengeance was never the point. Exposure and accountability were. I did what I could with the ledger and the tools I had. It didn't erase the cost. It changed the architecture. The ledger still sits somewhere in files and drives and safe deposit boxes. I keep copies, redundant and ironclad, just in case. Because men who have learned to love their silence are always tempted to find it again. And because some truths, once let out into the light, have a way of waking the world.